of a widespread and intractable commotion was the fact that, instead of being divided or instigated by a few persons, they were unanimous in their fury and equally unanimous in their composure, with so uniform a constancy that one would have thought them to be under command. Meantime Germanicus, while, as I have related, he was collecting the taxes of Gaul, received news of the death of Augustus. He was married to the granddaughter of Augustus, Agrippina, by whom he had several children, and though he was himself the son of Drusus, brother of Tiberius, and grandson of Augusta, he was troubled by the secret hatred of his uncle and grandmother, the motives for which were the more venomous because unjust. For the memory of Drusus was held in honor by the Roman people, and they believed that had he obtained empire he would have restored freedom. Hence they regarded Germanicus with favor and with the same hope. He was indeed a young man of unaspiring temper and of wonderful kindliness, contrasting strongly with the proud and mysterious reserve that marked the conversation and the features of Tiberius. Then there were feminine jealousies, Livia feeling a stepmother's bitterness towards Agrippina, and Agrippina herself too being rather excitable. Only her purity and love of her husband gave a right direction to her otherwise imperious disposition. But the nearer Germanicus was to the highest hopes, the more laboriously did he exert himself for Tiberius, and he made the neighbouring Sequani and all the Belgic states swear obedience to him. On hearing of the mutiny in the legions, he instantly went to the spot, and met them outside the camp, eyes fixed on the ground, and seemingly repentant. As soon as he entered the entrenchments, confused murmurs became audible. Some men, seizing his hand under pretence of kissing it, thrust his fingers into their mouths, that he might touch their toothless gums. Others showed him their limbs bowed with age. He ordered the throng which stood near him, as it seemed a promiscuous gathering, to separate itself into its military companies. They replied that they would hear better as they were. The standards were then to be advanced, so that at least the cohorts might be distinguished. The soldiers obeyed reluctantly. Then, beginning with a reverent mention of Augustus, he passed on to the victories and triumphs of Tiberius, dwelling with especial praise on his glorious achievements with those legions in Germany. Next he extolled the unity of Italy, the loyalty of Gaul, the entire absence of turbulence or strife. He was heard in silence, or with but a slight murmur. As soon as he touched on the mutiny, and asked what had become of soldierly obedience, of the glory of ancient discipline, whether they had driven their tribunes and centurions, they all bared their bodies and taunted him with the scars of their wounds and the marks of the lash. And then with confused exclamations they spoke bitterly of the prices of exemptions, of their scanty pay, of the severity of their tasks, with special mention of the entrenchment, the fosse, the conveyance of fodder, building timber, firewood, and whatever else had to be procured from necessity or as a check on idleness in the camp. The fiercest clamor arose from the veteran soldiers, who, as they counted their 30 campaigns or more, implored him to relieve worn-out men, and not let them die under the same hardships, but to have an end of such harassing service, and repose without beggary. Some even claimed the legacy of the divine Augustus, with words of good omen for Germanicus, and, should he wish for empire, they showed themselves abundantly willing. Thereupon, as though he were contracting the pollution of guilt, he leapt impetuously from the tribunal. The men opposed his departure with their weapons, threatening him repeatedly if he would not go back. But Germanicus protested that he would die rather than cast off his loyalty, plucked his sword from his side, raised it aloft, and was plunging it into his breast, when those nearest him seized his hand and held it by force. The remotest and most densely crowded part of the throng, and what almost passes belief, some who came close up to him, urged him to strike the blow, and a soldier by the name Calusidius offered him a drawn sword, saying that it was sharper than his own. Even in their fury this seemed to them a savage act and one of evil precedent, and there was a pause during which Caesar's friends hurried him into his tent. There they took counsel on how to heal matters, for news was also brought that the soldiers were preparing the dispatch of envoys who were to draw the upper army into their cause. that the capital of the Ubii was marked out for destruction, and that hands with the stain of plunder on them would soon be daring enough for the pillage of Gaul. The alarm was heightened by the knowledge that the enemy was aware of the Roman mutiny, and would certainly attack if the Rhine bank were undefended. Yet if the auxiliary troops and allies were to be armed against the retiring legions, civil war was in fact begun. Severity would be dangerous, profuse liberality would be scandalous. Whether all or nothing were conceded to the soldiery, the state was equally in jeopardy. Accordingly, having weighed their plans one against each other, they decided that a letter should be written in the prince's name to the effect that full discharge was granted to those who had served in 20 campaigns, and there was a conditional release for those who had served 16, and that they were to be retained under a standard with immunity from everything except actually keeping off the enemy, that the legacies which they had asked were to be paid and doubled. The soldiers perceived that this was all invented for the occasion, and instantly pressed their demands. The discharge from service was quickly arranged by the tribunes. Payment was put off till they reached their respective winter quarters. The men of the 5th and 21st legions refused to go till in the summer camp where they stood the money was made up out of the purses of Germanicus himself and his friends, and paid in full. The 1st and 20th legions were led back by their officer Caecina to the canton of the Ubii, marching in disgrace. Some sums of money which had been extorted from the general were carried among the eagles and standards. Germanicus went to the upper army, and the 2nd, 13th, and 16th legions, without any delay, accepted from him the oath of allegiance. The 14th hesitated a little, but their money and the discharge were offered even without their demanding it. End of Book 1, Part 2.